I'd like to start today's show with a poem by the classic South Dakota poet Charles Badger Clark. This is a poem that I know Gail Steiger is fond of, and it relates to his interest in the international horse and cattle culture. This is Horseback Men by Charles Badger Clark. The horseback men were the freest men from the days of the big ice pack, when they first crawled out of their musty den and followed the horse's track. The caveman crouched in the dark and died, but his son found out that the world is wide when he climbed on a horse's back. Horseback men, oh horseback men, bow-legged, brave old crew, here's to your kin where the free stars spin, cowpuncher, Cossack and Bedouin, Gaucho, Mongol, and Sioux. The bold Goth spurred into lazy Rome, great Genghis loped with his force. Our Westerner fought for his wide new home, astride of a bronc, of course. New land, new freedom, or just the deuce, whenever the spirit of man broke loose, he went and straddled a horse. Horseback men, oh horseback men, the weak hid under their roofs, but only the strong to your tribe belong. So history's mostly a horseback song, and set to the thud of the hoofs. But the sword bows down to the monkey wrench, and the saddle fades from the scene. For the warrior squats in a miry trench or charges by gasoline. And grim time, quitting his old horse jog, whirs us forward into the fog on the wings of a swift machine. Horseback men, oh horseback men, your long day dims at last, but your fame will climb to a myth sublime from the horse tracks thick on the trail of time and the echo of hooves from the past. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy west and beyond. My guest today is Gail Steiger. Gail Steiger is a working cowboy, filmmaker, songwriter, and poet. If you haven't already, I'd recommend listening to the first part of my interview with Gail on the last episode. After I interviewed Gail, he reached out and said that there were some stories that he wished he had told me that we didn't have time for on that first interview. So he sent me some recordings. These are like audio letters or postscripts from Gail, and I'm sure happy to share them with you. In this first section, Gail talks about his cowboy mentor, Bill Murphy, and Gail wrote a song for Bill Murphy that's entitled Riding on the Wind. One line says, "He cinched up, opened the gate, and counted 'em out to me, and it made me feel about 10 feet tall to be in his company." Here's Gail Steiger.
We left off. I had told you the story about the pot deal and Bill showing up asking if we needed a job, which we really did. And so I went to work for Bill. I guess that was in the fall of 1980. I remember one of the first things we did, Thanksgiving. We went over to, Bill took me to the ROs. There was a party over there at a camp. I think we went to Francis Creek. And Ross Knox was working at the Double O's at the time, but he had come over to the Thanksgiving party. And I heard Ross, this is in 1980, I heard Ross telling cowboy poems around the fire. And that was the first time I'd heard anybody. Most people, would play a little top 40 country or whatever if they could play the guitar, but the only other person I'd heard do poetry was my grandfather. But there was Ross. being a cowboy poet before cowboy poetry was cool. Bill was great. He really took me under his wing. I had been working with Dad's cows all the way through, growing up and through high school. But I had never worked on a big rough outfit, and it was just quite a bit different. And I really learned a lot from Bill. The first thing he did was make me, he kind of made me a whole new outfit. He made me a pair of spurs, and he made me a set of taps with some stirrups in them, and made me a set of chaps, and braided me up a bunch of tie strings, and he just really went out of his way to make sure that I had the right kind of stuff. He taught me a lot of stuff. I followed him around for 8 years, I guess, and during that time I really learned how to trail a cow. I learned that the ground doesn't lie, and that those cows don't fly, and the conditions on the ground change all the time, and you have to kind of pay attention to that. If it depends on how much moisture's in the ground and what the temperature is. If it's freezing, cows can get a pass for the whole part of the morning if it's cold in the morning. But following Bill around was really good to teach me how to trail stuff. The main thing that he taught me was never give up, never surrender. He just would not give up. He never would. If something ran off, Bill was not going to let him go. He was going to get whatever it was that caused us the wreck. And he also taught me he would never let me or anybody else get in between him and whatever the hard thing to do was. He always rode the toughest horses, and he always took the longest circles, and if there was a hard job, he was doing it, not waiting for you to do it or telling you to go do it. I really appreciated that about him. Just learned a lot. I also learned a lot from our neighbor. I worked for Bill that fall, and then he was kind of done moving cows, and our neighbor on the other side, Harry Chanaretto, had been working at the Yolos, and he hired me to help him build a bunch of corrals that winter. And we cut oak trees all winter and built a big set of corrals. And then Harry let me go through the works with those guys too at the Yolos. And I remember Harry teaching me how to shoe on his horses. He let me nail shoes on all the horses that he'd cut me out, and didn't worry a bit if I drove a nail a little too high or way too low, whatever it was. He was like, well, they'll stay on there for a little while. You nail enough of them on there, you'll have it figured out. So that was really good. Harry and his brother John were working there at the Yolo, and they had a guy named Chuck Harvard who had a Barney Wells camp off in Scotts Basin, and a distant cousin of mine named Jay Runston. And that was great to work with a crew of guys who really knew what they were doing. We had a lot of fun. And then later, I had a friend, this would have been about 83. I had a friend who was in the video business in Phoenix. His name was Phil Gessert. And I was playing music mainly just to entertain myself. That's what I would do for fun. We didn't have any cell phones, didn't have any electricity really in either of the camps that I was at. I had a generator, but didn't like to run that. And that's when I really got to playing music, and I wrote a lot just to entertain myself, and I wrote a lot of songs. And I recorded one, and Phil heard it, and he said, that'd make a great music video. So Bill came up and shot a video around that song. Bill was the star of the video. And it was a song called City Friends. My city friends just don't know what this punching cows is all about kind of thing. And we made this video starring Bill, and we showed it to Gene, and he really liked it. Gene Polk was the guy that was running both. He was the managing the Cross U for the Margaret Morris Foundation, and he owned the Spider, and we were running both of those ranches together. And Gene liked this music video, and he said, hey, would you like to do something a little bit longer? Sure. So Gene said, well, get busy. And we went. By then, Phil had moved from Phoenix to Hollywood. He was cutting commercials at a post-production house called The Real Thing, right on Hollywood and Vine. And we went and talked to Phil about what we should do with our opportunity to do something a little longer. And he convinced us that we had to, if we were going to be taken seriously, we had to shoot on film. And he kind of told us, get started, go out and shoot some stuff and bring it back, and we'll see if we can put it into something that tells a story. So we went out and shot up a bunch of footage. At the time, 16 millimeter film cost about $200 a roll to shoot and develop. A roll was about 11 minutes long. So it was costing us $200 for every 11 minutes just in the film stock and the processing. Not to mention, we had our friend Ed George shot some of it. He had his own 16 millimeter camera, and that came in real handy. We didn't have to rent that, and he was willing to go camp out or do whatever we had to do. So he started shooting stuff, and I remember we pulled out all the hero shots and stuff and went over to Hollywood to start editing, and we stuck all of our favorite shots in order, and it was just gibberish. It didn't add up to anything. There wasn't any real story there. And Phil said, you guys, you have to think in terms of sequences. You have to think in terms of a beginning and a middle and an end. You got to tell a story. It's not enough just to put up a bunch of pretty pictures. And if you guys are left to your own devices, you're going to have a 4-hour home movie that nobody but you can watch. So, armed with that, we went home and went back to the drawing board. And because it was so expensive, we would set this movie camera up to interview everybody. We decided we'd do it with Bill on the Cross U, and then everybody that I'd worked with on the YOLO. This was in about 85, so I'd been working out in the Campwood area for about 5 years. And we decided we'd feature all of those guys. But the problem was we'd have to slate. We had a separate audio recorder, and we'd have to slate all the takes so we could sync our audio with our film. And as soon as you clap that slate in front of everybody, they would immediately get tongue-tied. It was kind of intimidating. And, I could just hear the meter running all the time. 1001, 1002. It didn't take any time at all to shoot up $200 worth of film on somebody that was afraid to talk. So pretty soon we decided, we better not do the camera. We better just record the audio on everybody. And that's what we did. We recorded audio, and then we cut their audio tracks into the track that would make the narration. And then we cut the picture to that, which is kind of backwards. And then we wrote music for that, actually, and fine-tuned the cut to the music, which is also backwards, but it worked pretty good for us. Long story short, we shot on that for about a year. It got longer than Gene had wanted, but he saw some of what we were doing, and he decided to stay with us. And we shot stuff for a year, and then we spent another probably 6 months just editing that. And we finally, in 1987, we had a version that we thought was good enough to shop, and we ended up making a deal with PBS, the Phoenix affiliate KAET. Took that to PBS, the national office, and we got a national release out of that, which was great. And KAET, from that point forward, for many years, we would make like a show a year with them. Louis, my brother, he was a river guide in the summer, but he was home most winters, and usually we'd do a project or two for KAET to supplement our river running and cowpunching income. And Gene was always real good about letting us do whatever we needed to do, and kind of, work out our schedule to fit both the ranch and for Louis to fit his river schedule too. In 1988, the poetry gathering in Elko decided to dedicate the gathering to my grandfather. And he was 95 that year and was not really able to travel. Warren Miller was one of the folklorists who, along with Hal Cannon and Jim Griffiths and some other folks, kind of got the whole cowboy poetry gathering thing up and off the ground and moving. And Warren, he had seen Ranch Album and what we'd done with that, and he knew that I was familiar with how to make videos and stuff, and he asked me if I would video Papa and take that up to the gathering for the keynote address. So I got a video camera and propped Papa up in front of his George Phippen painting illustrating tying the knots in the devil's tail, and I had him sing his song and address the gathering, and he did, and I took that video up there and had a great time. We went up with Ross Knox, and Ross was in an act with another friend of ours named Steve Rafters at the time. Ross and Steve played music and Ross did poetry, and they would trade poems and songs together. That was kind of their act. So we went up there with Ross and Steve, and I went with there was another friend of ours named Jeff Robertson, who was a musician but also in the video business. And Jay Dessard too was up there. Jay Dessard, the photographer, he was teaching at Prescott College then, and he liked to go to the gathering. And there weren't that many hotel rooms in Elko at the time, and we all shared a room. Had a great time. Ross and Steve had this cassette. I think they called their group Horse Tracks, and they had a cassette tape of poems and songs, and they had a marketing strategy. Their friend Bill Workman had built a bunch of little stands out of horseshoes that you could stack 5 or 6 cassettes in, and the marketing strategy was to go to all the brothels in Elko and see if they could put a cassette stand on the bar and sell tapes that way. I don't know how many tapes they sold, but we sure had fun going around and visiting everyone. That was a real eye-opener for me. It's like, oh my God, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. But we sure had a good time. I premiered Ranch Album at the time too. They were showing it over in the Northeast Nevada Museum, and I remember setting it all up and rolling it for the world premiere, and there were like 3 people in the audience. It was pretty grim, and I just gave up. There was a staffer at the museum, and once I had the projector set up and the audio kind of where I liked it, I just asked him if he wouldn't mind making sure that the film, turning the projector on at the appropriate times. I went back over to the convention center, and at that time they organized the gathering by state. So all the Arizona poets would have their turn, and all the Colorado poets would have a turn. And I went in to see the Texas poets. Joel Nelson and J.B. Allen were there. I can't remember who else was with them. But Joel got up during his time, and instead of doing a poem, he took about 5 minutes and made a plug for Ranch Album. Told everybody what a great movie it was, and he sure thought they'd enjoy seeing it if they had time. So after that big plug from Joel, the attendance at Ranch Album really picked up. And I was really grateful. I went over and introduced myself to Joel, and he invited me to come to Alpine. It was just in a couple of weeks. I think it was towards the end of February. And he and his wife Barney had started a gathering there, and I think that was the 2nd or 3rd year for that gathering. And he wanted to screen Ranch Album there, and I'll be darned if he didn't make me get up there and play music in public for the first time. right out loud. I remember being really nervous, but Joel really saw me through all of that. That was still pretty close to our checkered past, you know, to being convicted felons for our pot deal, and I felt like I needed to convince Joel, or I needed to confess to Joel, you know, that had happened, because I didn't want him to get in trouble or to have any of that bounce back on him. So I made my confession to him, and he never mentioned it again. And he said it didn't bother him a bit, and you know, everybody makes mistakes, and we just went right on. And I ended up coming back that spring later to go through the works. Joel would put together the crew for the 06 ranch. They ran a wagon, and they'd usually hire 10 or 12 guys. They had about 3,000 cows that they were working on the 06. And Joel asked me if I would come and go through the spring works with them then. This was, I guess that was the spring of '88. And I had a great time with those guys. You know, in Arizona, sometimes we were a little suspicious of people from Texas because everything in Texas is bigger and better. But, you know, I never met a nicer bunch of guys to work with. Those Texans were really welcoming and really friendly, and I had a great time working with them. I learned a lot from Joel, too. Joel was of the opinion that, you know, you're training your cows every time you see them, whether you know it or not. And he was also of the opinion that cows are smart, and they can be trained. And he would do things like, if we were driving a bunch of cows somewhere and we were going by a corral or something, he would corral them. He'd put them in one side of the corral and just let them go out the other side and never do anything bad to them in the corral, just so they'd get in the habit of going into the corral without getting scared or getting nervous. And Joel was the first guy that really got me thinking about, you know, what do you do with your cows? How can you help them? How can you help them not be afraid of you? And how can you help it not be, you know, an adversarial relationship? It was really great to get to hang around with him. He taught me a whole lot there, too. Ross had actually gone through a works or two before me there as well. So we ended up having that in common later on, too. I think it was along in there, Joel ran into Ray Hunt, who had learned a lot from the Dorrance brothers about how to deal with horses fairly and how to communicate with them without scaring them, too. And Joel had been to some Ray Hunt clinics, and I remember him really helping me with my horsemanship, too. That was a real good influence. I went through those works with Joel, I think, from 88. I went through about 5 works with him, so it would have been 88, 89, and 90. And then in 91, I was just day working at home until then. But then in 91, the IRS had told Gene that one of the ranches that we were running together over here, the Cross U Ranch, which was owned by the Margaret T. Morris Foundation, the IRS, the Margaret T. Morris Foundation was a 501c3 organization, and the IRS said, this is not an appropriate venture for you to have in this 501c3. You need to divest yourself or divest this asset. So the ranch had been listed for, 8 or 9 years, I guess. And in 91, the IRS got real particular, and they said, no, it's not enough just to put it on the market. You must divest yours. That, you know, you have to sell this ranch. And I got hired at that time. Bill left the Cross U in 87, and he went to work for the W. Diamond Ranch down in Skull Valley, which was it was a smaller ranch and easier to get around. So Bill had left, and the guy that had been running the Cross U in his stead, when Gene listed it, he decided he wanted to go do something else. His name was Jimmy Rogers, and he went to work I think for the University of New Mexico there in Las Cruces. They had a ranch too. And Gene asked me if I would come and run the cross shoe and make sure that it sold. There was a guy from Washington State named Dennis Maroney. He had been teaching ag up there. And Dennis's wife, Debbie, had just graduated from medical school and was going to hang up her shingle in Prescott. Dennis had always wanted a ranch, and he kind of helped get Debbie through medical school. And the idea was that now she would help Dennis pursue his dream by buying a ranch. So I showed them all around, and it took about a year. They decided, they would buy the ranch, and we counted all the cows over to them and, tagged them all, and that took about a year. And when we got that project all done, Gene asked me if I would come and run the Spider, which was south of the cross shoe. So, actually, I guess I day worked here for a couple years after that, but in 95 I came and managed the Spider full time from then on. While I was working at the cross shoe with Dennis, there was a guy named Bud Williams who came through town, and Bud Williams was famous for being kind of the Ray Hunt Dorrance brothers of the cow handling world. Bud had done a lot of work up north with all kinds of animals, with caribou and just all kinds of, with elk. He has a video of him sorting elk in a pen and doing stuff. And Bud was really high on the idea that the best way to keep cattle healthy was to reduce stress. And the best way to do that was to handle them as quietly as possible. And he was doing these clinics, and Dennis signed us up. I guess this was in 91 or 92, and we went to a 3-day clinic with Bud Williams, and that really changed my life a lot too. That really helped me with handling cattle quietly and as gently as possible. Bud had a big impact on me. I remember when Temple Grandin came and did the keynote at the Western Folklife Center at the poetry gathering one year. I got to visit with her, and I asked her if she knew Bud, and she said, "Oh yes, he was very instrumental in teaching her stuff about handling cattle." And she couldn't speak highly enough about him. But for anybody that's wanting to learn more about being easy on your cows, I sure recommend trailing up Bud Williams. So I attended the poetry gathering in 88, 89, 90, 91. The Folklife Center tried to do a cowboy music gathering in the summer, and I went to a couple of those too. I think that was 91, 92, somewhere in there. And then I went through a period where I think I went in 93, but then there was a period where I didn't go. I got a Dear John letter a couple of times, and I decided, oh heck, they know where I am and how to find me. If they want me, they'll call me. And so I had a little hiatus from cowboy poetry, but then in 99, I think Joel got on the anonymous committee, and he came by and he said, "All right, Steiger, get in the truck. You're going to Elko. We need you up there." I think JB was on the committee that year too. Nobody's supposed to know, but I think that's what happened. And I came back to the poetry gathering then and realized just how much I'd missed it. It turned out, I think of all the friends that I made, that ended up being, among the best friends that I've had in life. When you get down to the friends that you can count on your fingers, and you realize that at least a hand's worth of them all came from the poetry gathering. That's a pretty big impact. In 95, I got to do, Charlie Seaman was the executive director, and the Folk Life Center had quite a bit of success bringing people from other herding cultures over to Elko to attend the gathering. They brought some Australians, and they brought some people from Northumberland, and I think from Scotland, and those cultural exchanges really went over well. And I think in 2000, yeah, I guess it was 2000. This was into the 2000s. It was probably 2003. They brought the Mongolians over, and that was a big hit. And in 2005, Charlie decided he was going to take a delegation over to Mongolia to kind of complete the other side of the cultural exchange after having the Mongolians come and visit. And there was an outfit named Bujum Expeditions. Kent Maiden and Linda Svensson were the founders of that outfit, and they were a guide business, and they were actually the first Anglos to take people into China, and they were also doing trips in Mongolia and South America and all over. And Charlie hooked up with Kent and Linda and got them to do the logistics for our trip to Mongolia. They already had staff in Ulaanbaatar, and they had a circle that they made, with they had several contacts around the country and kind of knew their way around. So they were handling the logistics for that Western Folk Life Center trip to Mongolia. I got to come along and bring my video camera, mainly because I could do double duty. I could shoot some video of the trip, and I could also sing a cowboy song or tell a cowboy poem once in a while. Stephanie Davis came on that trip. Bruce Stanger also came. They have both performed at the gathering many times. Ron Kane, who was in the band with Hal Cannon, Ron got to come. Hal and Teresa went with us too. Dave Stanley was on that trip. We had a great time. It was one of the just most exciting trips I've ever taken, and I just really fell in love with the Mongolian herding culture and with their country and with their horses. The little horse that I got to ride, I think he's the toughest horse I've ever been on. Just had a wonderful time. Kent and Linda, the next year after Mongolia, we went to Brazil and Argentina. Wiley and the Wild West came on that trip. That was really fun too. We started off in Brazil, and then we went down and stayed with Martine and Dolores Jones in Bariloche at the bottom of Argentina. What a beautiful country. And, if you like the horse and cow deal, that's a wonderful place too. I can't say enough about how cool that was to get to travel around with Charlie and everybody. And how good it was just to learn that, if you make your life herding livestock, you just have way more in common with people than you do things that separate you. I mean, horses and cows and goats and sheep, they don't care what language you speak. They don't care what kind of costume you're wearing. They don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. They don't care. They're just going to give you back whatever you give them. And if you've made your life doing that, then it's real easy to make friends with people who are doing the same thing, because you tend to understand each other, and you tend to value the things that are kind of just important to the pursuit of life and health and happiness and like that. I think that was one of the things that set the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering apart from all the other gatherings that have sprung up around the country. I think it was a great program. I'd love to see them get back to doing more of that. But I'll be forever grateful to Charlie for taking me and showing me the world. I went to Mongolia, Brazil, Argentina. In 2003, Lorraine Rawls, who used to be a frequent performer at the gathering, Lorraine's maiden name was D'Entremont, and she was French. Her ancestors were, and she had traveled around in France and found these cowboys in the south of France, in the Camargue, these cowboys called Guardians. And Lorraine hired me to do a documentary on Guardians. We shot on that from 2003 through about 2006 or 7, I think. And that we thought, oh, France would be a good place for the Folklife Center to do a cultural exchange too. And so we did a trip with Charlie, and where we introduced all the participants to the people that we had met in France. Kent and Linda did the logistics for that too, and that was really fun as well. While I was shooting on the Guardian movie, I met these Stephanie and Gilbert Arnaud, these people who have a manade, a little ranch in the Camargue, and I became really good friends with them. Stephanie has come over. Steffi came over to work cows with us, I think, in 2008 or 9, and she's been coming every year since then. And she'll saddle up with us and go camp out, whether it's rain or shine. But it's really been great to get to know her, and it's played out that we have a lot more in common than we do things that separate us.
In this next segment, Gail talks about the friendships he's made through cowboy poetry, and it reminded me of a poem by our mutual friend Randy Riemann entitled A Rare Find. The first stanza says this: "It's a wonderful thing, though it's hard to explain, when you meet a new friend on your way, and in no time there's a reason behind the ease that your friendships obtained. For your spirits are one, though your friendships begun only just a few hours ago. Yet the things that you share and the feeling that's there is more lasting and precious than gold."
Mike Beck was a great friend that I got to meet through cowboy poetry. I met Mike. We did a show up in South Dakota. Way back there. Mid-90s, I think. Early 90s, I guess. And about 99, Mike introduced me to Joe Walter, who was... Joe was doing a bunch of ranch roping schools. Joe was a student of Bill Dorrance's, and he wanted to... He and Bill decided it'd be a good idea to put on some ranch roping clinics. And Joe needed somebody to help him make a video of ranch roping techniques, and Mike turned me on to Joe, and I had a great time with Joe. I made this video of his, a DVD that he put out called "There's Roping to Do," and I got to hang out with Bill Dorrance while we made that, and that was really exciting. What a good guy. Bill was he was 91 years old and always looking for a better way to do stuff. Mike also turned me on to Wendell Berry. Mike gave me this book that Wendell Berry wrote called The Unsettling of America, which really opened my eyes just about, what's happened in agriculture in America. But I feel really lucky to count Mike as a friend. Randy Riemann too. I got to be friends with Randy, and Randy was one of Bill's students too, and a good friend of Joe's, and that's another friendship that I cherish. Dave and Deanna McCall, their son Rusty. Rusty introduced me to Amy Ocker one time in Texas. Randy Houston was trying to make a TV show, and we all had to record a song or a poem for Randy, and I played him a song, and I was sitting there with Rusty, and he's like, hey, that's Oscar's mom. Amy was with Oscar in there. Oscar was going to do one next, and Amy looked like she was about 12 years old. and Rusty introduced me to her. And Ross Knox later brought her out to the ranch, and one thing led to another, and we thought we were falling in love and decided better go work cows together. If we could do that, we could do anything. We cut to the chase. So Amy came out and we worked cows for about 10 days, and that was about 15 years ago. We're still hanging out, and we get to be a little closer all the time. Yeah, when I think about the friends that I've made through cowboy poetry, when I count all my best friends, and like the very top all came through cowboy poetry. Yeah, I'm sure grateful for getting to meet Ramblin' Jack and Ian and Don. Waddy has been a great friend and a great encourager. Paul Zarziski, Wally McRae. Yeah. You look at this whole thing, and I guess we're creeping up on dang near 40 years. Sure didn't take very long for all that time to go by. Seems like just the blink of an eye. Proud of you, Randy, for doing what you're doing, getting everybody's little snapshot of it. Someday it'll be fun to have all that stuff for the folks who come down the road after us. In a tool saddlebag down some far distant trail, who'll find our good book of old cowboy poems? Between the love letter lines, keepsaked and cited, will our scriptures of Letterbuck Elko be told? Cowboys and cowpony poems, my dearest West did not ride alone. We'll love you always, rode right alongside, ride cowboy poetry ride. Ride the wide open ride. How we brought her all back, Julianne to McCarty, swapping big windies and laughing past dawn. Starlight and barlight, maybe some breakfast, fresh horses, fresh verses, then climb right back on. How 5 wild nights filled a year's worth of lonesome, from far between yard lights to waltzing so close. The hot fiddles and licks put the rouse to our heartbeats, hell bent for the old ways and romance and ghosts. Cowboys and cowpony poems, my dearest West did not ride alone. We'll love you always, rode right alongside, ride cowboy poetry ride. Ride the high country ride. Well, we gathered for years, then before they could brand us, we scattered like mavericks and renegades must. But we kept her forever alive in our stories, 'cause some stranger's sure wishing he'd been here with us. But we ain't quite there yet, boys, so let's head back to Elko, to that saddlebag filled with our love letter poems. Still forked to this wildest horse we call Earth, hope still gallops the big open range of our souls. Cowboys and cowpony poems, my dearest West did not ride alone. We'll love you always, rode right alongside. Ride, cowboy, poetry, ride. Ride without fences, ride. Stay out of the wire and ride. Paul Zarzyski.
Alright folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Gail Steiger for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Gail at gailsteigermusic.com. I'd like to thank Hal Cannon for playing the Cowboy Crossroads theme music. You can find out more about Hal at halcannon.com. I'd like to thank my Trail Boss patrons Bob Kelly, Chris Ryden, and Scott Anderson for their support of this episode. If you're enjoying Cowboy Crossroads and would like to help me keep it going, you can become a patron at patreon.com/cowboycrossroads. That's patreon.com/cowboycrossroads. You can also make a donation on my website at andyhedges.com. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.